What up, gamers? My name is Coach Hypehouse, and I coach for Team 6 Guns. Today I'm going to cover how San Francisco Shock dominates King of the Hill maps by breaking them down into 3 separate phases. So when executed properly, these 3 phases of King of the Hill should translate to 3 separate and distinct team fights. These phases I like to think of as taking control, holding control, and overpowering your opponent. So phase 1, taking control, happens on the opening team fight. It consists of trying to control the map, trying to win the Zarya charge, and then securing an aggressive off angle to close the fight out. Phase 2, holding control, happens after you secure the opening fight, and now you're defending the point. During this phase, you're going to draw out a neutral team fight as long as possible, hopefully into last fight territory. This forces the enemy team to use ultimates and puts the economy advantage in your favor. If played correctly, that should lead you into your 3rd phase and hopefully last team fight, overpowering your opponent. This phase is pretty simple. You're just overwhelming them with your ultimate advantage. So let's look at a few examples. Here we have Shock versus Atlanta Reign, and Shock is entering phase 1, the opening team fight, or taking control. So remember, what they're aiming for here is to try to control the map, try to win the Zarya charge war, and then try to take an aggressive off angle. So immediately, Choyyobin and Moth look for the double boop to get the enemy off of high ground, while Super looks to take the door and beat them to high ground so that way he can open swing on 6 of his opponents. So they end up getting booped off of high ground themselves, and they go for the next best thing, holding pillars. But since Atlanta still holds the high ground, they end up winning the neutral advantage. At this point, Shock just has to stabilize. They're losing chunks of HP and cooldowns at a faster rate than Atlanta is. Luckily, Shock makes the call before getting critical, and they end up with a really clean restabilization. Now here's where the coordination starts to get sick. Sinatra, who's now charged up from the first engagement, decides to sneak up to high ground, noticing that it's not being contested by Atlanta Reign right now. So here's why these high ground advantages are so powerful. Atlanta Reign is presented with a choice. Either they loosen their grip on Super and decide to deal with Sinatra on high ground, giving up their current tempo advantage. Or they could ignore Sinatra and choose to just aggress on San Francisco's core. Either way, if they don't choose quick, a high charge Sinatra is going to start poking holes in their defenses by softening people up and making them vulnerable to engagements. That, or he could just delete people entirely. Here he opens up fire on an unsuspecting Erster, and in a display of legendary coordination, his entire team follows up. Choyyobin uses boosters to boop him in for his team, while Ryan pops around the corner and throws a fire strike. And all this was somehow communicated by Shock without even being able to see the point. It's nuts. Unfortunately, they don't manage to land the kill, but the threat of Sinatra being up there is still way too high for them. But what can Reign really do at this point? Send Diva up there to deal with them? She'll get melted. And for the rest of the team to go up there and deal with it would mean they would have to give up the point entirely. They have no choice but to just all-in Super. This at least forces Sinatra off of high ground in order to use his bubble on Super, but also forces them to clump up and let Super cleave the entire team. Just look at his ult charge. He goes from 76 to a full ultimate, and this is basically in one swing. At this point, there's no coming back for Atlanta. Shock gets the picks they need, and they move on to phase 2, holding control. And just like I said, it starts with Sinatra pushing forward and lobbing right clicks into the enemy team as they move towards point. He also uses one of his bubble rotations so that he can top up his charge, so that way he's full by the time the engagement happens. It also allows him to milk some ultimate percentage, so that way he gets to his grab first guaranteed. Now she kites back and she secures high ground with her team. At this point, Shock is going to play very disciplined and very defensively, and just take advantage of the fact that their Zarya has a high charge and the enemy Zarya does not. This means that they have neutral advantage. Neutral advantage means that because you have high ground, because you're defending and they have to walk into your shots, and because you have a higher charge Zarya, you're always going to win the fight if there are no ultimates involved, and Atlanta will never be able to take space. Their shield will break first, their HP will always be lower, and they'll be charging ultimates at a slower rate. Shock can play this game all day. The clock is ticking in their favor, remember. They want to stretch this out as long as possible. The longer this fight stretches out, the better. And with Choyyobin in a spot to be able to contest point without taking any damage himself, Shock can realistically just wait for Pokepo to have to recharge his shield behind cover. That gives him a free shatter, essentially. So really, as long as Shock is patient and forces Atlanta to have to waste all their time dismantling their neutral advantage by getting them off high ground and by evening the Zarya charges out, there's really only one very predictable way that Atlanta can do anything about this, and that's using ultimates. The problem is that if your enemy has a secure spot on high ground, which ultimates do you use against them? It's hard to follow up on a grab, you can't earth shatter them, and it's not that hard for the enemy team to react if you throw a bomb in. So this is where Rally comes into place. Rally is most often used to take back space when you're at a neutral disadvantage. So Atlanta is essentially forced to use Rally with no other options. However, Shock, knowing this, can simply match all of the ults 1 for 1, and they still come out at top. Erster is forced to pop his rally, Rascal reacts by popping his rally, and they still maintain the advantage. And now they don't have to give up any space. On top of that, Shock's will last longer because they used it second. Remember, Shock's still maintaining their neutral advantage, so at this point, all they have to do is play reactively and trade ults 1 for 1. Atlanta, with their resources dwindling from a losing neutral fight, is likely to start panicking and overcommitting to ults. So now Atlanta has to make another choice. Do they sacrifice support ults just to take back tempo? Well, if they do that, then Shock can just kite it back and then return fire with one of their ults. And now they won't have any tools to defend from those ults because they used them for tempo. Shock's patience has forced Atlanta to use a very predictable grab, and it gets swallowed up. You see, this isn't random, it's all according to Shock's plan. Atlanta's getting to a point now where they're close to a breaking point, because this neutral fight is starting to dwindle away at their shield. That means that Super's getting ready for a free shatter. This shatter doesn't even have to kill anything. As long as they get a support ult out, all they have to do is kite back and go back to draining the clock down. On top of that, once Sinatra finally grabs, he's going to get his ult back for free, and the enemy team is going to have to transit. Now that Atlanta is starting to really feel the pressure from the neutral fight, all Sinatra has to do is take one of his aggressive off angles and start to pressure D.Va for a free grab. Dako uses boosters to get to safety, and this is when he pops it. Dogman responds accordingly and pops his trance, and Super's ult literally goes from 0 to 100. Now Shock has achieved everything they need to in Phase 2. They dragged the match into last fight territory, and they only committed to ults they needed, swinging the economy in their favor massively. The sufficient use of ult economy lets them coast through Phase 3, which is overwhelming your opponents. I mean, even if they had lost the point, all Shock has to do is come back and bury them in ults. So here we are at Phase 3. It's looking really good for Shock right now because they have both of their support ults still and a huge tank ult. Sinatra moves forward once again just to use a bubble rotation to keep his charge up. Shock fortifies the high ground, and this fight is basically over on paper. Shock can play neutral fight just long enough to get it to 99. At that point, they can slam them with ults. Atlanta's only real hope is for Massa or Dako to boop somebody off high ground, and they can quickly burst down that target. They do manage to land the boop, but at that point the bubble comes out and that gives them enough time to start using the ults. And this map is done. Remember, this formula is going to play out differently on every single map. This is just a best case scenario, and your games are not always going to be this black and white. We'll look at one more example, this time against the Charge. So we're back at Phase 1, or the opening team fight, and Shock is just looking to get their Zarya charged up while avoiding charging up the other Zarya. From here they can start to pressure charge onto point, and then they can get Sinatra up on the high ground for an off angle. Now something interesting to note is that Super is not throwing his fire strikes into the core of charge, he's actually throwing them at Zen. Now whether or not this is to avoid charging up Zarya, I don't really know. Just an observation I had. Regardless, the second one actually ends up catching them, so they get a free pass through Phase 1. But just like I said, every teamfight's gonna look differently, and sometimes stuff like this happens. Or sometimes the enemy team picks your Zen off. You just have to be adaptable. So now we're on to another Phase 2. Sinatra moves forward to maintain his charge and to get ultimate percentage. They kite backwards along with charge, just barely staying out of their engagement range, so that way they can play the neutral game as long as possible. They get back to high ground, and Charge knows that they can't just leave them up there to play a neutral game, so they have to push them off as quick as possible. Shock hops down to point, they rotate back up, and at this point, Charge is starting to get low on resources. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of cover for Charge to use to restabilize, so they're forced to hop down to point. Shock ends up following him down to point on the opposite side of Sinatra, giving him a sick off angle. So yet again, Shock has forced their opponents to use an ult. If they don't, their shield is going to get roasted, and Super is going to be able to use his shatter for free, and then he'll just get it right back by swinging into the grab on the next push. Shock answers back with trans, and by throwing out that disposable shatter. So dragging this teamfight out a little bit longer would have been ideal, but nonetheless they're able to close it out, and move on to Phase 3. Charge wastes so much time just trying to figure out how to pad around Shock in order to not get hit by all their ultimates. Just look at Sinatra, he doesn't care about no neutral fight in Phase 3. Look at him hiding over here in a dark alleyway with a hoodie on, looking to just jack somebody up with his grab when they walk through. So yep, there it is, he grabs the wall, and you guys know what comes next. So there you have it, 3 phases, 3 team fights, and yet another dominating CoTH performance by Shock.
See you guys next time on Overwatch Abstractions.